I have a feeling it's going to be a hard time getting through this video today. Hi, my name is Victoria. So today, I'm going to be reviewing The Chestnut Man by Søren Sveistrup. I kind of hate that this is my first ever review because I didn't fully like this book, but I also didn't fully dislike it either. So you can see I've got tabs in this book in various colors. I put a review up on my Goodreads, which I will link down below in the description box. You can go over there and check it out if you want to. I'm basically just going to be expanding on that review a little bit, probably not a whole lot. On Goodreads, I couldn't put it at 3.5 stars, so I put 3. If you read this book, you might have really, really enjoyed it. I don't doubt that Søren Sveistrup is a really talented writer, and I know that he wrote The Killing, which I have not seen, but honestly, this book made me want to check it out because I imagine it's really good. This was originally written in Danish, so I read the English translation of it. There was a lot of telling rather than showing in this book. Let's see if I can find... I'd marked 235. Yeah, this is what I mean. So, also, I will be talking about spoilers in this video. I will warn you when I'm getting to that point in this review where it is going to be spoilers. This right here is not going to be a spoiler because it's just an example of what I'm talking about. So I'm on page 235. The first line says, Hess can tell she understands. That is like a perfect example of telling instead of showing, because how can he tell that she understands? What is she physically doing that gives him that impression? There are several instances in this book where that happens, where it's a sentence telling what happened or what a character is thinking or something of that sort, rather than actually showing it. That was one of my chief complaints with this book. I actually kind of had a feeling that this book may have originally been written in a screenplay format, or it was intended to be written in a screenplay format, and I say that because Søren Sveistrup is a screenwriter. I can absolutely tell based off of this book, because a lot of it feels like a screenplay adapted into a novel format, and there was nothing else added, nothing to expand on things, to help us actually see what the characters are thinking or how they're reacting to things. And it was kind of frustrating, actually, because I couldn't really get invested in these characters because I had no clue what they were thinking really any times unless I was explicitly told what they were thinking. The first chapter, which I believe was actually a prologue, the very first chapter, I think it was a very strong first chapter. It kind of functioned more like a prologue because we were following a character who is never a point of view character again. I won't spoil anything about the first chapter, but I was hooked. I was excited for more. So, yeah, this is a crime thriller. There's a serial killer on the loose, trying to find him. And, I put, page 368, which is over halfway through the book. I wrote down a character who was becoming a suspect to me. I was completely surprised by who the killer ended up being, so kudos to Søren Sveistrup for that. I had no idea that the killer was going to be who it was. It made perfect sense to me. I am going to read a little bit off of my Goodreads review. While off to a very strong start, it had me really eager for more, like I talked about with that first chapter, that kind of prologue type of chapter. It really ended up falling very flat for me. There wasn't much to the characters, never really had much of a chance to get to know them beyond surface level things. As a result, I felt nothing for these characters because I knew very little about them. I don't even think one of the characters, so I'm gonna kind of get into spoilers. After this point, I'm not gonna give any more spoiler warnings. One of the main characters, his last name is Hess. I don't remember what his first name was because throughout the whole book, basically characters were reduced to just being called by their last names. So you had Thulin and Hess. I hope I'm pronouncing Thulin right. Hess was working with, I believe it was Interpol, before the events of the novel, but he was dismissed, and so he was sent back to Copenhagen to work with the police department there. Maybe I completely missed it. I don't think we ever found out why he was, it's probably not the right word, dismissed from Interpol, because he was trying to get back there. I think his job or his performance or something was under review. They had sent him back to Copenhagen until there was kind of a decision made on whether or not he would get his job back. And I don't remember if we ever found out why. That could have added a lot of layers to Hess's character, but again, I have no memory of ever reading it, so I don't even know if it was actually explained in the book. So I said a lot of the characters were also stereotypes that I've seen in crime TV shows like Criminal Minds. There were also a couple moments where there was some unnecessary sexuality of female characters by male characters that came across as misogynistic and pointless, where it was basically reducing them to being important because they're attractive. It's page 161. This one character, his name's Nylander, is speaking with the police station's female communications consultant. Normally, he'd have taken the time because he's been attracted to her ever since she turned up for work and started waltzing in and out of his department and dispensing good advice. But right now, as he heads down the stairs to the courtyard, he wants to use the rest of the walk to clear his head before meeting with the press, and her media studies degree, probably 3 years of cafe lattes and casual sex, isn't going to help him there. Why is that necessary? It's extremely minor and a very small detail. First of all, it establishing that this male character is attracted, this young woman, using language like he's been attracted to her ever since she turned up for work and started waltzing in and out of his department. I get that could just be how his character thinks. It's unnecessary details that contribute nothing to the story, which is my problem with it, on top of just the fact that there was apparently the need to include the comment about her media studies degree consisting of 3 years of cafe lattes and casual sex. Totally unnecessary. That's really all I have to say about that, is it's really unnecessary, and I don't like it. So, okay, the next instance, I think it's another yellow tab, because this is one I was actually trying to color code. What was only a few chapters later, we are now with Hess's point of view, and Hess is the male detective of the female-male detective pairing that we have in this book. They're meeting with a doctor to talk with the doctor about the case. Hess is kind of like taking note of his appearance, kind of drawing some conclusions about him. You know, like a gold wedding ring that indicates he's married, but that isn't the impression he gives when he shakes Thulin's hand, and Thulin is a woman. The hurriedness that accompanied the consultant's handshake with Hess quickly transforms into a smile and sustained eye contact when he turns to Thulin. For a moment, it catches Hess off guard that the doctor finds Thulin attractive because he's never looked at her that way himself. So far, he's mostly found her annoying, but grudgingly, he has to admit that he can understand why the doctor's discreet gaze follows her slender waist and shapely backside as she turns away to find a chair. Again, unnecessary. Basically just an excuse to set up that Hess is now attracted to Thulin based solely off of her physical appearance, because he clearly states, so far he's mostly found her annoying. But now he's like, oh, wait a second, she's attractive because she's got a hot body. That's basically what's happening. So that was frustrating to me. It was only a couple moments, thankfully. If it was far more common in this book, I would have much more of an issue with it. Thankfully, it's not. So, that being said, that kind of wraps up what I had written in my Goodreads. So, my first note that I have, the scenes are sometimes split between 2 chapters. It's kind of pointless to split a scene that's following the same point of view character into two different chapters, which is the case here with chapters 59 and 60. Between the two of them, the scene amounts to basically 4 pages, and it's all from Thulin's point of view. The end of 59 was clearly meant to create suspense for what was happening, but 60 immediately picks up following the cliffhanger. All the suspense is gone, because we didn't switch the point of view, we didn't go somewhere else in the story, and wait and see what happens, or wait to find out what happens. That was an example of a cliffhanger that was just immediately reduced to nothing. So I'm still in chapter 59. So Hess and Thulin, if I remember correctly, they are at the house of one of the victims. She lived there with her son and her boyfriend, and the boyfriend was kind of a suspect in the detective's eyes. I should have said this earlier. There's mentions of abuse in this book. There are mentions of rape and domestic abuse, and also abuse of a child. You can kind of fill in the blanks there with what kind of abuse it was. Be warned, if you're going to read this book, there are mentions of that in here. The boyfriend was abusing the son. Hess is basically confronting the boyfriend. He gets attacked. So Hess was at the house, kind of by himself. Thulin left because Hess wasn't really telling her why they were at the house, why he needed to be there, why he was checking things out. And so chapter 54, 5 chapters prior, is when this kind of whole scenario starts unfolding. This whole thing is happening. Thulin had noticed a car, but in that moment, she doesn't speculate on whose car it is. Yet, in chapter 59, it establishes that she returned to the house. So at the end of chapter 54, I believe it was, it says that she left. She drove away after seeing this car. She didn't think about it. So she's standing outside the house again. It says she runs through the events of the evening in her mind. Driving down the ring road back into town, it struck her that the black car might be the boyfriend's Mazda 6. That's why she went back. I personally think that would have been more effective at the end of 54, that as we're following her as she's driving away, she has this moment where she's like, wait a second, and then she turns back. End chapter, pick up with Hess's point of view. I feel like that would have been a much more effective cliffhanger. So my next is chapter 61, page 209. Chapters 59, 60, and 61 should have all been one big chapter, because end of 59 and end of 60 were cliffhangers, yet each following chapter was still with Thulin's point of view. So we're back to that failed cliffhanger on 211, so we're still in chapter 61. We have another instance of telling instead of showing. It says Hess looks at her, she can tell he understands. How? We're back to, I mentioned earlier that there was an identical sentence with Hess, where it was instead Hess can tell she understands. Now it's Thulin can tell he understands. Like how? What gives her any indication that he understands? Does he nod at her? Does he kind of make a noise where he affirms that he understands what she's saying? What about what he's doing makes her realize that he understands what she's saying? All it says is he looks at her. How does he look at her? Are his eyebrows raised? Is he nodding? It's those little details like that would help give us some clues about Hess's character too, of his own kind of physical reactions to things. Because if someone's talking to me, I will nod and go so they know that I'm listening to them, that I understand what they're saying. What does Hess do? Does he nod and go I don't know how these characters actually react to things, because we're only really told that he understands what Thulin is saying or insinuating. I personally would have expanded and actually shown why she thinks this. That's just me. One thing I liked about the setup of this book is that it was split up between days, basically making sections of the book out of kind of the days. So everything after this until the next marker. It is taking place on Friday, October 16th, which I like that. Next marker. This chapter is the point of view of the husband of one of the other victims. Here's another kind of content warning about talking about domestic abuse specifically. Between 220 and 221, there's kind of a rather flippant, is the only way I can describe it, address of the domestic abuse that existed in this relationship between Eric and the victim and his wife Anne, who was a victim of the serial killer and also was a victim of domestic abuse. It can be boiled down to this is Eric's personality, his thoughts on the whole matter, him not really viewing the abuse as we would as outsiders, where clearly it's wrong. Domestic abuse is wrong and it's terrible, and yet he's the abuser, so he doesn't really view it that way. And I think that can kind of be, I don't want to say overlooked because that's not what I mean. It explains why this character and his point of view would have kind of this flippant attitude towards it. 220, there is mention of rape. Doesn't go into detail, like explicit detail. It mentions it. This guy is made to be terrible, awful. You just want to hate him. So I did want to mention this because this was a very technical aspect of the book that was a consistent issue with me. There is a very noticeable lack of dialogue tags throughout the story, except for a couple very rare instances, and those instances were usually a flashback. Everywhere else, they're just not used. It was really frustrating, actually, because sometimes I didn't know who was saying what until later in the conversation, and I had completely reversed who was saying what, which changes the conversation based on who was saying what. Let me find this very first instance, because it was very beginning of the book, kind of setting the stage for... What I was attempting to say before I got interrupted was I was talking about the dialogue tags. So the second chapter... Actually, no, that's wrong. So the third chapter begins from Thulin's... So it's Thulin's point of view. Apparently her name is Naya. It's never mentioned again, I don't think. She and her... I don't even know if he's really her boyfriend or what, but it opens with a sex scene, first of all. That's how it starts. When I first read this, I flipped who said what. Thulin says, it's best you go before she wakes up. The boyfriend, whose name is Sebastian, he says, why she likes it when I'm here. Thulin says, come on, get up. Sebastian says, only if you two move in with me. I had originally flipped it around where it was Sebastian that said, it's best you go before she wakes up, and then Thulin said why she likes it when I'm here. It reversed it for me so that it sounded like Sebastian was the one with the child, Thulin was the one who'd stayed the night, and was the one who was being told she had to leave. I don't think it was until the next chapter that I figured out, wait, I reversed it. It was Thulin that was telling Sebastian to leave. It's a very minor thing. Like, at least plot-wise, it's not really significant to the plot, but that's the problem with not using dialogue tags to establish the pattern that people are speaking to each other. And this happens quite a few times, where I reversed who said what, because I had no indication of who spoke first, and then who spoke second. There was also a moment, I guess it does mention again that Thulin's first name is Naya, because I'd written a note at the end, towards the end. Okay, I'm gonna have to hunt through my tabs.
A few moments later.
Here it is. It's the very first tab I put down. So what's happening is they're talking about the case. They're talking about what they know so far. Another spoiler warning, just in case. So they're talking about what they have. So someone speaks. They're talking about one of the pieces of evidence they have, and there are two pieces of evidence that they have, and they both have fingerprints on them. I believe it's Nylander that's talking about, and apparently have nothing in common besides the two Chestnut Men and the fingerprints, so we're going to start, and he's interrupted by someone saying, what fingerprints? No dialogue tag, but instead, it's followed by Nylander glances at Jansen, who asked the question. And this is more just a personal gripe on my part, where if you're going to do that, where you're going to say in the next paragraph, You have to say it that way, who asked the question, where it literally says, Nylander glances at Jansen, who asked the question. You might as well just put the dialogue tag, what fingerprints asks Jansen, or Jansen asks. It just still doesn't make sense to me why you would not use dialogue tags. Hardly ever. It just makes things more confusing, at least for me. Someone else might have had no issues with it. It really took me out of the book every time that I had to pause and make sure I read the conversation correctly, because depending on who says something, it will change the meaning of the conversation. That was my point of highlighting, well, it's the third chapter, where there's the conversation between Thulin and Sebastian, where it changed who each character was based off of the context of what they were saying, where I originally thought it was Sebastian who was the single parent having his partner over, or whatever it was they were to each other, overnight, and that it's establishing that this happens often enough that they know that the daughter enjoys when the partner is over. But no, it's actually Thulin who said it, so it's establishing she was the single parent. Not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but dialogue tags are kind of important. Let's see, I've got a page 235 note that says show don't tell. And that was the very first example I had given of Hess can tell she understands towards the beginning of the video. So that was that note. I'm not sure if you can hear that wind or not, but it's pretty windy today. Another thing that this book does is it switches point of view characters a lot, to the point where there's too many points of view characters for us to really end up actually caring about them. In a crime thriller, when you show the points of view of the victims before they are killed, it takes away from the suspense. When I read a crime thriller, I'm looking to have that suspense where I am just as in the dark as the detective. If it's a story that follows the point of view of one of the detectives on the case, I want to find things out as they do, get the clues as they do, and I want to have the chance to try to solve it myself based off of what is being presented. It's not like the killer was ever given away, because like I said earlier, I was completely surprised by who the killer actually was. But when you show all these different characters' points of view, you're taking away some of that suspense, at least in my reading experience with the Chestnut Man. There's too many points of view in this book that don't really accomplish much, because it takes away time that we have to learn about Hess and Thulin as characters too. Got page 238 marked. So chapter 66 is the next potential victims. They've identified this woman as a potential victim, so it's her point of view now. She's kind of your stereotypical young mother, kind of overly sexualized young mother. But this is what I had marked here is Jessie. Her name is Jessie. Her daughter is in dance class. Jessie is having an affair with one of the fathers who brings his daughter to dance class. An affair is kind of it is an affair because the guy is married. So she dressed appropriately for that, I guess is how I should phrase it, because she was fully expecting to have some fun with him that day, to phrase it that way. But what I had marked here is all the mothers are lined up along one wall, a row of stuck-up bitches deep in conversation about wellness, autumn getaways to Gran Canaria, I don't know if I pronounced it right, either way, and how their kids are doing in school. And it's just like a little bit of that stereotype. It just makes me think of like dance moms, that dance moms are stuck-up bitches. That was a little stereotype right there. A very minor one, though. It could be much worse. So the father shows up. She's really upset that this guy has not shown up, so she can't, have her fun with him. Because, that's what's important. Not your daughter's dance class or something. He's ignoring her. She's upset about it. Says even though she's standing beside him like a fawning dog, she's luring him outside. They get outside. I think they're in an alley. So it says, as she comes down the stairs and pushes through the heavy door into the corridor beneath the studio, she can hear his footsteps behind her. She pauses and waits, but as soon as she sees his face, she can tell he's angry. What the hell is wrong with you? Don't you get that this is over? You've got to leave me be, for Christ's sake. This is where I've marked. Basically, she sexually assaults him. Oh boy, we're getting there. I've only got 2 pages of notes left, so I'm getting there. Let's see what my next note was. Chapter 76, because again, we are over halfway through the book, and we get a new point of view again. This time, it's a police officer who's in charge of protecting Jessie and her daughter. So he actually did take the time to establish some of this character, Martin Rick's character and personality. But he ends up getting killed. So it's like, we learn about this guy just for him to get killed, but we don't really learn about Hess or Thulin beyond surface level stuff. It was just kind of a rather minor note that we spend time learning about this guy. And also, he's on duty, and he's scrolling through Pornhub. It's just, why? Like, I guess maybe there are cops like that. I don't know. I don't think someone who is in charge of protecting someone from a serial killer would be so, like, lackadaisical about it that he's sitting there on Pornhub rather than doing his job. 272. We have another instance of the sexualization of a female character by a male character. It says, although Alco Mom is standing behind the sofa, Rix can see she has a decent ass. For a moment, he wonders whether he has a chance, whether there's time for a quickie on the sofa before his partner comes back with the sushi. It is one of Rix's many fantasies, sex with a witness under his protection, but that particular fantasy has gone unfulfilled. Really? Again, we have the sexualization of another female character, of a young woman who is under protection because a serial killer is potentially after her. And this cop just wants to get some. And for whatever reason, we need to know that. I personally don't like it. And it's just another instance of reducing this character to her physical attractiveness. The fact that the cop notes that she has a decent ass and it makes it very clear that he wants to have sex with her because, that's the most important thing to be talking about right now. And finally, on the last page of notes, 273, we have what I think is one of the worst tropes. We've got the cop who is ignoring orders out of spite. It establishes that Rix doesn't like Hess. Totally valid, you don't have to like everyone that you work with. But that is the only reason that Rix ignores orders. Like, Hess tells him, stay in the house and protect Jessie. You hear what I'm saying. Martin Rix hesitates a moment, then he breaks the connection so that the only sound is the alarm. If Hess thinks Rix is going to take orders from him, he has another thing coming. So he doesn't stay inside and protect her. The car alarm is going off outside, which has prompted this whole thing. He decides he wants to be the hero, rather than just stay inside and protect her from inside the house, where they would be safer. Instead, he has to go outside, and, it gets him killed. That was kind of one of the worst tropes I saw, was that there's always that one cop that disobeys orders out of spite, and then gets himself killed, or gets the person under his protection killed. I hate it. It's the worst. But to me, it strikes me as it was necessary. Otherwise, they would have caught the killer sooner. And this book would not have gone on for another 200 more pages. So I get that it was only for plot so that the book didn't end. Basically right here. On to my next note, which is 357. We actually have an effective cliffhanger. They're investigating a potential lead. I forgot to mention this earlier, but one of the other aspects of this plot is that there was a daughter of a minister, someone who works in the government. Her daughter went missing a year before. They had convicted someone for killing her, but they had never found her body. So she is missing, presumed dead. Basically, her fingerprints were found on these little chestnut men that were being left at the scenes of the crimes, prompting detectives don't want to reopen the case because that indicates to them that she may potentially be alive. They believed that they had found a couple who may be the ones killing people now, and that may have taken the daughter, Christine. They have found where they live. Thulin is inside investigating, and she finds a fridge, and she opens it up, and then it's the end of the scene. And then our next scene, we're with Hess. Effective cliffhanger, because all I could think about then was, what the heck did Thulin just find in the fridge? And then you eventually find out, and so that was an effective cliffhanger. I was really happy about that. 374. For the most part, we get all the information as it's discovered, regardless of what it is. This time, though, he decided to withhold the information, so Nylander clearly knows what Thulin found in the fridge in the couple's home. They lived in an old slaughterhouse. He is meeting with the Christine's parents. So it says, Nylander describes the irrefutable proof they found in the old industrial slaughterhouse that evening. He was thinking of the evidence with a tingle of happiness in his belly, but when he finishes speaking, you can see in Rosa Hartung's eyes that he has snuffed out her last hope. So it's implied that there's evidence in there that basically proves that Christine, her daughter, is dead. I think it was really effective for him to withhold this information. I just thought it was interesting that now of all times, he decided to kind of withhold the specifics of what was found rather than just explicitly stating it, as he had been doing the entire time. Page 379. They didn't mark it for any specific reason other than it was just a shift between days, a change between days. And I had the thought of, what was the significance of the first chapter, where essentially you follow a cop decades before this is happening, and the cop is killed at the end of the chapter. There was no mention of this cop again, no mention of that, what was happening there. He basically found a family slaughtered in the house, except for 2 children who were still alive, and then someone snuck up behind him and killed him. So I just kind of marked that there. And then 383, shortly after, I think it mentions Thulin's name again, because, yeah, I wrote, forgot her name was Naya. And then, funnily enough, after I had made that note about, what about the cop from the first chapter, he is mentioned again. They pull up this old case again, and he is finally mentioned again, and this is the missing link. That's all of my notes. Final thoughts. I was completely taken by surprise by who the killer actually was. I'm not going to actually spoil that, because I actually really liked the reveal of the killer and realizing, oh, that makes total sense to me anyways. Final thoughts are that basically a lot of my issues with this book are at a more technical level. I think he had a really strong grasp of this plot. I just wish that we had more details. I wish that we spent more time with the characters. I wish that more time had been spent infusing details to make this more of a novel rather than a screenplay adapted into a novel. That was my review of The Chestnut Man by Søren Sveistrup. I rate it 3.5 out of 5 stars, based off of what my option was with Goodreads. That's the end of this video. Again, it's going to take me some time to figure out how to end these videos, but this was the end of my very first review. I wish it was for a book that I ended up fully enjoying. You know, it is what it is. This was the first book that I actually took the time to take notes on and mark things and actually really, really read it for the purposes of reviewing it. Thank you for tuning in. I will include links below to my website, my Goodreads, my Twitter, and then my Instagram. So if you want to follow me on any of those, you can check them out. Thank you.